So we looked at the verse 30 there, and so it ends with farewell. All right, so I read the verse. So Claudius Lysias summarized his report with the reason for transferring the Roman citizen Paul to Governor Felix. As far as the chief captain was concerned, Paul was no criminal. Since there was a plot against a Roman citizen, all Roman authorities had responsibility to protect him. Concluding statement of the commander included the reason for the appearance of the prisoner and the hope of reconciliation at a higher level. So Claudius wrote all that. Next page. Basically, the commander was attempting to move the responsibility of a Roman citizen to the higher authority for safety and for wise and decisive jurisprudence. Paul was a Roman citizen under attack by Jews, and it was needful for the governor. That the governor would make a judicial decision. Claudius set up the arrangement that the Jewish accusers would bring their accusations to Felix for his determination. He concluded the epistle and sent it with the prisoner to Felix at Caesarea. Then the soldiers, as it was commanded, took Paul and brought him by night to Antipatris. The whole delegation of soldiers, cavalry, spearmen escorted Paul, the prisoner, part way to Caesarea. Luke recorded the final episode. So they took him to Antipatris. The midnight ride took the military escort to the Roman outpost of the resting place of Antipatris, safely away from the 40-plus fanatics at Jerusalem. With enough distance between the escort and the conspiratorial plot in Jerusalem, all could rest for the next day. Remember, they were traveling by horse, so they could easily distance themselves from the 40. On the morrow, they left the horsemen to go with him and returned to the castle, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. After a safe overnight ride to the coastal city of Antipatris, Paul was in a secure resting place for the first leg of his journey to Caesarea on Tuesday. The physician Luke was writing, as a writing companion, recorded the details on the following day. He stated, on the morrow they left the horsemen to go and return to the castle. It says, Paul, Luke, and Aristarchus were on horseback along with the cavalry. The riders could travel the 27 miles of the flat coastal shoreline to Caesarea without the need for foot soldiers. The other military personnel returned to the castle of Antonia in a less tense journey. Further, the narrator reported that the Roman cavalry fulfilled its responsibility and delivered the letter and the prisoner to Felix. Luke summarized the transaction with 3 plural aorist verbs, who, when they came to Caesarea and delivered the epistle to the governor, presented Paul also before him. All right, so succinctly, Luke stated that the horsemen came to Caesarea, turned over the letter, and presented Paul to Felix. So here are these aorist verbs. All right, when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was, and when he understood that he was of Cilicia, I will hear thee, said he, when thine accusers are come. And he commanded him to be kept in Herod's judgment hall. The Roman citizen had arrived safely at Caesarea, the same city he had freely visited recently on his way to Jerusalem. So I mentioned that. He went by Caesarea where some saints were, and now he's back there in prison. So if you go to Caesarea, you can see the fort there. So we've seen that before when we've been there. And we could even look down on the remains of what probably was one of the rooms in which Paul was imprisoned there at Caesarea. So it's really shows a great deal. It's on the coast and so on. But anyway, So here at the judgment seat. So anyway, the historian revealed that Governor Felix received and read the communication from Claudius. Luke said, and when the governor had read the letter, he asked of what province he was. The governor's first concern was under those whose jurisdiction did the Roman citizen fall. Tarsus, the capital of Cilicia, was several hundred miles away, and thus Felix needed to decide whether to send Paul there or keep him in the realm of the province of Judea. Governor Felix decided to incarcerate the Roman citizen until the Jews came to make their case. The case may have seemed too trivial to send Paul to the province of Syria, Cilicia, and with the Jewish delegation coming, the Roman leader kept the apostle. Said, I will hear thee, and when thine accusers come, and so on. All right? So next page, the Roman citizen proven guilty by breaking no Roman law was nevertheless put under heavy Roman guard until the Jewish accusers came. As Paul revealed later, the imprisonment in the praetorium was the will of God for him. Remember that in Philippians chapter 1. Talks about the praetorium. In the meantime, 40 plus Sicarii apparently absolved their vow for another day. So, so much for the vow. So you get the character of these men. They're really not serious about that. I mean, anyway. Summary. With the privilege to present his case before the Sanhedrin, Paul attempted to defend himself before the members. He did not get far into his argumentation when hatred and conflict developed. After an apology from Paul, he began to divide the Pharisees from the Sadducees over the doctrine of the resurrection. Dissension broke out, and the chief captain delivered the apostle to the Gentiles again. The Lord appeared to Paul and encouraged him about the trip to Rome. In the meantime, a small group of Sicarii banded together to ambush the Roman prisoner and kill him. Paul's nephew heard of the plot and informed Claudius, who countered the ruse and sent Paul away to Felix. With 470 soldiers, Paul arrived at Caesarea with a letter describing the situation. The governor received the Roman citizen and prepared to hear the Jewish accusers about his crime. Felix planned to hear the defense of the Apostle Paul against the Jewish charges. That's a summary of the chapter. So, a lot going on there, as we see, but it gives you an idea where we've been, what's going on here, and so on. All right, chapter 24. So the hateful high priest Ananias brought his best lawyer, Tertullus, to prosecute the case against Paul with 3 accusations. He was a troublemaker, he's a leader of the Nazarene sect, and he profaned the temple. These are in the first 9 verses. Of course, Paul denied the charges that he stirred up the Jews and confessed that he worshiped the God of Israel, believed the scriptures, and the doctrine of resurrection. He challenged the Jews in Asia or Jerusalem to state their charges to Felix. AD 57. The governor put off any decision until Claudius Lysias came. Meanwhile, Felix and Drusilla came to hear Paul declare the Christian gospel of Christ and hoped to receive bribes from Paul. The apostle remained bound for 2 years until Festus came. So, not knowing what to do, they just stalled. And so Paul here is in prison for 2 years because these politicians playing their games, hoping for bribes and everything else. So Paul is at the mercy of them from a human point of view, but this is the Lord's plan for Paul at this point. All right, now, so Paul's defense before Governor Felix and the accusations in verses 1 through 9. After 5 days, Ananias the high priest descended with the elders. And a certain orator named Tertullus, who informed the governor against Paul. right, Luke added a temporal marker in this section of his journey of Paul. Since Paul arrived in Jerusalem on Friday before Pentecost Sunday, and since he fulfilled the 7-day vow on the following Saturday, the tumult occurred and Claudius delivered him. On the next day, Sunday after Pentecost, he met with the Sanhedrin and Claudius delivered him. So this is where we're getting these days of the weekend in the account. On Monday, the plot was exposed and reported to Claudius, who sent Paul to Caesarea that night, arriving before Felix on Tuesday. Later, Paul testified that he had 12 days since he had come to Jerusalem. The historian gave an intriguing temporal fact. And after 5 days. So here, once again, Luke is giving temporal markers here. Apparently, it was 5 days after the apostles' arrest that he stood before Felix. Next page, so next paragraph. Nevertheless, Ananias arrived with his Sanhedrin devotees, probably the Sadducees, and a legal consultant for the Sanhedrin, an attorney named Tertullus. He no doubt was a Roman who could speak Latin and negotiate Roman law. He has a Latin name, by the way. The ethnicity of Tertullus was probably Jewish, making him a good ally for the Sanhedrin while dealing with the Roman government. Being a Jew, he spoke for the Jews and was informed the governor of formal charges. He no doubt had the same animosity towards Paul as he did the employer Ananias. Presumably Tertullus spoke to Felix in Greek and not in Latin because of the Jews, and of course Luke wrote the wording in Greek. To Ananias, the prosecution for the apostate Paul was of great importance. To Felix, not so much. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and that very worthy deeds are done unto this nation by thy providence, we accept it always and in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness." So Tertullus is accusing Paul, but he's got an introduction. This is a pretty flowery introduction here. That because of Felix here, the worthy deeds are done in this nation with all thankfulness. So here's...
We have a good word for that.
Yeah, what's that?
Plamos.
Is what?
Plamos.
What's that mean?
Means kind of flattery.
Oh, flattery, yeah, okay. Was that what, good word in Ireland, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Is it an English word or Irish? It's an Irish word, all right. All right. So how do you spell that?
PLA for the MA for the...
Slow down, what? What? Say that again?
PLA for the MA for the S, no more.
Okay. Yeah, I'll look it up.
No,
This will be a test question, though, I'll tell you. All right.
I'll check the spelling.
Oh, thanks. And when he was called forth, Tertullus began to accuse him, saying, "Seeing that by thee we enjoy great quietness, and the very worthy deeds are done in this nation by thy providence, we accept it always in all places, most noble Felix, with all thankfulness." So his flattery outdoes Lysias' flattery. So are we in the Roman political world here? Things haven't changed much, have they? Tertullus, the rhetorician, all right, anyway. Rhetorician, all right, was skilled in oratory and presentation. Nevertheless, he had difficult prosecution since Paul was a Roman citizen and there were no credible charges against him. Luke began to narrate the defense, and so we've read that section here. Next page. As he began to accuse the Apostle Paul, Tertullus first offered his laudatory and flowery praise of Felix. His exaggerated fawning over the administration of the governor and his accomplishments belied the nature and office of Tertullus. The Apostle Paul was familiar with the pandering effort of rhetoricians and had great disdain for it, averring about the preaching, saying, And I, brethren, when I came to you, came not in the excellency of speech or wisdom, declaring unto you the testimony of God, for I determined not to know anything among you but save Jesus Christ and him crucified. And I was with you in weakness and in fear and much trembling. And my speech and my preaching was not with enticing words of man's wisdom, but in demonstration of spirit and of power, that your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God. So 1 Corinthians chapter 2 is what Paul is saying in theory, you might say, or in his practice, but the introduction of this is exactly what he's talking about. He did not engage himself in this. So the physician, Luke, now became court recorder. So he still has that book with him. So I'll take down notes. Writing down the verbiage of the proceedings and scripturating the words of inspired commentary. The lawyer Tertullius attributed to Felix alone the national peace and providential planning which supposedly prospered the people. So think of that. What quite a man here Felix was. Of course, the sycophant skirted over the incident of the Egyptian who attempted to bring down the castle of Antonia with its 4,000 Sicarii. That's back there in chapter 21. So, the Roman attorney attributed to Felix the theological concept of divine providence, using loosely the term foreknowledge, with the rare word pronoia. So we've got a footnote on this. Somewhere there's a footnote. Oh, probably with the Greek. In another place, Paul declared the source of true knowledge, saying, and we know all things work together for good to them that love God. All right? And of course, this comes through the ministry of prayer in the assembly. As Paul enjoined, saying, I exhort therefore that first of all, supplication, prayers, and intercessions, giving thanks be made for all men, for kings, and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceful life for the godliness and honesty. The legal counsel continued his feigned and seemingly apropos remarks to the governor. So we accept it always in all places, most notable Felix, with all thankfulness. All right, with three exaggerated verbal qualifiers, Tertullius praised Felix with always, all places, and all. The lawyer flattered the judge about his omniscience and universal praise, which praise is only fitted for the Lord. Solomon said, the lying tongue hateth those that are afflicted by it, and by a flattering mouth worketh ruin. The Lord gave his opinion about men who seek and receive the praise of men for their oration, as he smote King Herod. That's back in chapter 12, remember that, when he enjoyed the praise of men, was smitten. Notwithstanding that I be not further tedious unto thee. So you know how tedious that is when people just keep praising you. That just gets so tedious. All right, enough, right? Right? Yeah, that, you know, and your congregation just keeps going on about how great your message was. Okay, that's enough. All right.
Run away.
Yeah, right. Right. I'll give you 5 more minutes and we're done, all right? I pray thee that thou wouldest hear of us the clemency of a few words. All right, after exhausting his contrivance of flattery, Tertullius recognized that he needed to proceed with the accusations against Paul. Because of the weakness of the prosecution, the attorney for the Sanhedrin made an additional personal appeal to the judge Felix. Historical recorder Luke said, notwithstanding that I be no further tedious unto thee, I pray that thee that wouldest hear us of thy clemency a few words. Not wanting to be offensive with too much flattery, Tertullius requested that Felix show some gracious consideration to the few words of the prosecution. So now that I've flattered you, I'm expecting something in return, like a judgment on our side. So this is typical of these unregenerate lawyers then, and maybe even today. It is obvious by their own admission that Ananias, the Sadducees, and Tertullius had no substantive argument against Paul. Even as Tertullius laid out the charges, he fumbled around with sentence structure and words. The court recorder, Luke, let Theophilus know how poorly the attorney worded his presentation. The rhetorician was better at flattery than he was at prosecution. So looking somewhat at the Greek, it's kind of an awkward, rough reading of the Greek. Anyway, verses 5 and 6. We have found that this man, a pestilent fellow and a mover of sedition among all the Jews throughout the world, a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who also had gone about to profane the temple, whom we took and would have judged according to our law. Judged according to the law. What was that? Rioting and killing them. That's in this official setting, the lawyer Tertullius expressed the prosecutorial charges in an awkward and an inelegant construction. First, the official declared that the official declaration had no main verb, but instead started with a participle and then followed with an incoherent collection of exaggerated claims. So now we're just talking about the Greek there. Most English translations have attempted to smooth out the awkward grammar by turning the participle into the main verb. Tyndale set the pattern with, "We have found this man." Aside from the mangled declaration, the charges were threefold. Tertullius charged Paul as a pest, a ringleader, and a desecrator. Luke stated the charges saying, "For we have found this man," and so on. All right, next page. First, Tertullius characterized Paul as a nondescript nobody who endangers society with terrible pestilence of civil unrest. The universal peace that Felix supposedly established. So remember, he's given peace all over the kingdom. And now we have somebody that's going to undermine this peace that you have given. All right. Universal peace that Felix supposedly established was under great threat from this agitator of national peace with an instigator of... The rhetorician expanded on the accusations, claiming that this prisoner stirred up riots among Jews all over the world, presumably the Roman world. Of course, if any of this were true, Felix would need to intervene and stop the Jewish pest. Second, the lawyer averred that Paul was the leader of a heretical sect of Nazarenes. The Sadducees were a sect of Judaism, as were the Pharisees. And since Paul had identified with Jesus of Nazareth, as well as had the other Christians, this movement within Judaism was apparently distinct from Judaism, the Sadducees, and of the Pharisees. Ananias would have favored the Sadducees and their antagonism towards the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth. Tertullius enunciated the perspective of the high priest Ananias. Third, the prisoner was a desecrator of the temple. So he mentions this as well in this. The charge that Paul habitually attempted to profane the Zerubbabel Herod temple, but the Jews seized him and wanted to try him for his desecration attempts. All right, verse 7. And the chief captain Lysias came upon us, and with great violence took him away out of our hands. These poor Jews, they were just doing a simple little task, and soldiers come in. Yeah, right.
Jewish life matter. Yes. All life definitely doesn't.
Yeah. Anyway. All right. So the twisted narrative continued with the biased rendering of the attorney who not only condemned Paul but also blamed Lysias. The implication was that the Jews wanted to carry out their own jurisprudence, but the Roman commander interrupted them and compromised the jurisdiction comity. Tertullius complained, saying, but the chief captain came, and so on, with great violence. Actually, Claudius Lysias should receive commendation for stopping the Jewish mob from killing a Roman citizen. It's really what's at stake. And delivering him safely to the castle of Antonia. The violence started with the Jews and forced the Romans to use force to stop the murderous mayhem of the riotous Jews. So, see, Lysias leaves information out, and now he's under attack as well because other information's left out or twisted. So, you know, it's lie after lie and deception after deception. The CT had abbreviated the reading of the verse 6 and eliminated all the text of verse 7. The textual critics have posited that the so-called Western text erroneously entered the TR, producing a conflated text. So the aorist verb, ekrathamen, we took in verse 6 had caused problems for the critical text proponents and consequently received the D rating in the apparatus of the text. Theological liberal Metzger commented on the issue of the verb and omission of the verse 7. In the opinion of some scholars, Blass, Clark, and so on, the Western reading, which passed into the Textus Receptus, is necessary to the sense of the verses, for the aorist verb seems to require some sequel. So down at the bottom here before we go on, so the critical text omitted the whole verse, or 13 words, as it did the corresponding modern versions. Nevertheless, Tyndale, Bishops, Geneva included the Greek TR. Luther translation retained it. Alford queried about the explanation for his omission if the text were original, and so on. So anyway, we're reading here Metzger. The top of the other page. On the other hand, however, the abruptness of our verb there may have prompted desire for addition and completeness, and it is difficult to account for the omission of the disputed words if they were original. One of the effects of the addition is to change the reference of who there in verse 8 from Paul to Lysias, but whether this is to be interpreted in favoring or opposing the addition is disputed. Majority of the committee, so hooray for the committee, judge that, all things considered, the passage should not be omitted into the text. So, so this is verse 7. So you have it in your Russian Bible?
I think so. Yeah. Okay. Violence.
Yeah. So somebody have their one of their modern versions with them?
It's not in the ESV.
So you can't read it in the ESV? About the NIV, or you have that or not?
I don't have the NIV.
Yeah. So you can't read the verse to me from the ESV, okay. Because it's omitted. All right, so anyway, so why would that be omitted? I mean, Metzger's argument here is in Ain. I mean, the anyway.
There is an addition in Russian. There's words added.
There's words added?
But maybe it's from the next verse.
Okay.
Verse 7, right? A man who has ears to come unto thee. Yeah, that's where sometimes they do that. That's the one.
But they could.
The verse 7 is combined from the verse. Some word from verse 8, sometimes in Russian, put into the previous verse to make sense of the context.
Okay, so it's.
So verse 8, the first part, is in the verse 7.
I see.
At the very end. Sometimes they do that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
You can see that
Right.
the numbers are not inspired,
Yeah. Right. Sure.
but it is there.
Right. Okay. So, anyway, moving on. Well, I might as well read the footnote on 5700 there. So the Metzger, his book, A Textual Commentary on the Greek, page 490. So that's where I'm quoting this. The other members of the committee were the Protestant liberals: Kurt Allen, Lutheran Church; Matthew Black, University of Chicago; Alan Whitgrim, another liberal; and one Roman Catholic apostate, Carlo Martini. Good name for a cardinal, yeah. Anyway, their bias for the Gnostic-laced critical text reflects their unbelief in the perfect preservation of the inspired biblical text as promised by the precious Savior. So, anyway.
It's not in the NIV or the net.
Okay. In the what? The what?
The net.
Oh, the net. Okay, yeah. So, in this, the majority of the committee, so the committee we saw, named here, these are all liberals. None of them have a verifiable regeneration experience. And yet they're the ones dictating to us that what words belong and what words don't. So Bible colleges use the critical text, or the English Standard Version, like Bob Jones University, are getting their information about what words belong and don't belong in the ESV from a bunch of liberals.
And partially Catholics.
And yeah, right. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. So stay away from any Catholic named Martini. With his criticism of Lysias, not so oblique as previous, Tertullus added that not only had the chief captain interrupted their lawful judgment upon Paul, but now he had required the Jews to come to Caesarea and to turn the final verdict over to the governor. Well, how unkind was that? The enunciated complaint of Tertullus followed, commanding the accusers to come, and so on. All right, next page. The dissatisfaction of the whole turn of events aggravated the Sanhedrin members and unnecessarily imposed a difficult decision upon the governor. The attorney bemoaned. Tertullus obviously wanted a favorable judgment and verdict on Paul, and probably an official reprimand on Claudius Lysias. So things are getting more complicated all the time for these Roman officials dealing with these Jews. And here's Paul, he's just looking around. You people go at it. Try to work your way through this maze.
I think God made them the foolishness, because if you're going to do something like this, you don't attack two people. You just stick with Paul.
Yeah, right.
But in their foolishness, they did
Yeah.
attack the Roman, which was like
Yeah.
a very poor strategy if you're going to try to get Paul. You know?
Yeah, right. Yeah, Lysias would be the underling of...
Yeah, it's like a crazy thing
yeah.
to do, but the foolishness of men.
Yeah, right, sure. So this is such a foolish, and from a human point of view, is ridiculous. And in the ridiculousness of it, there's a humor in it. I mean, this is so stupid what they're doing. But here we have fools going after a man of truth. All right, so on top of 1649. So Tertullus, an unscrupulous lawyer, hired to mock justice, impugned the character and behavior of Paul, and deceived Felix, presented his pompous flattery, weak arguments, complaints of Roman interference, and vacuous certifiers. The spiritual emptiness of the rhetorician who represented the apostate Jews evinced through the inspired rendering of Luke. Solomon affirmed, "If thou seest the oppression of the poor and violent perverting judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they." So who's the higher than the highest? That's the Lord. So the Lord knows when this perversion is going on. So Lord and his servants recognize injustice. There will be a final accounting. All right, so Paul's defense here. Then Paul, after that the governor had beckoned unto him to speak, answered. See, so now Paul's showing deference to the Romans in the court, but he didn't show that to the Jews in the Sanhedrin. "For as much as I know that thou hast been of many years a judge unto this nation, I do more cheerfully answer for myself." Now his approach to the judge was different. There's really not flattery here. There is honest truth. He's been a judge for many years, and Paul is cheerful. He's happy. He's glad he can defend himself finally. So Paul really doesn't embrace the flattery. He doesn't need to. He just needs to give the truth out. Once again, Luke, the court reporter, was present to write about the proceedings of the trial of Paul. The physician was the divinely appointed eyewitness for the report on the life and ministry of the Apostle Paul. Paul was given the opportunity to speak on behalf of his defense once again, as Luke expressed. So he's been beckoned by the governor to speak, and he begins to do that. Without flattery and little fanfare, Paul saw the head nod from the governor and began his apologetic. He addressed Felix with a fair and honest acknowledgement about the longevity of the governor's judgeship. This seemed to indicate that there was an expectation of a mature and reasonable evaluation of the facts. So he's appealing to his maturity here, not the flattery that he's the all and end all. Since Felix had received a letter from Claudius, the former knew several facts. Judge Felix knew that Paul was a Roman citizen, that he received the charge of violating Jewish law, that the Jews wanted to kill him, that he was not guilty of capital crime, and that the Jews conspired to plot to murder Paul. Being filled with the Spirit of God and having lived in good conscience as a Christian, Paul did not stand before the bar of justice trembling. The Apostle Paul believed the Lord's promise that he would testify in Rome, and with spiritual confidence, knowing that he was in the will of God, he could defend himself more cheerfully. All right, so other translations there, more gladly or more with a quiet mind. All right, so we're going to stop this point. Tomorrow you have to find out how this goes.
Oh.
So you got to come back.